Alright, Congressman, we have an issue to settle today, June 18th, 1812. The British are becoming a nuisance to our country's well-being.
Yes.
They have practiced impressment on our U.S. merchant ships and forced them to fight in the Napoleonic Wars. The Napoleonic Wars, from 1803 to 1815, led by Napoleon Bonaparte. The British, from 1803 to 1806, interacted with the United States by impressing and seizing U.S. merchant ships and forcing the U.S. citizens into the British Navy. Paul, where are you headed to?
France.
We're gonna have to search this ship for, merchant reasons.
That doesn't make sense.
Well, if you don't get off that ship, we're gonna make you.
Oh.
They have stepped out of their bounds to blockade the French ports, so we cannot trade with them.
No more baguettes.
When Napoleon issued the Berlin Decree in 1806, Britain responded with a blockade of the French-controlled Europe. What are you puny French doing here?
We are sending our baguettes over.
Your
Oh.
baguettes will go nowhere. We're blockading you.
But we must get our baguettes over.
Turn around now before we make you.
You will try. Haha. Okay.
They have encouraged the Indians to take side with them and fight against our western expansion. Later in the war, a U.S. Navy ship mistook a British merchant ship, the HMS Little Belt, for a British Navy ship, one of the ones that impressed American sailors earlier, and so the American sailors fired upon it, thus angering the British.
Hey, where'd your other guy go?
The British ship over there took him away.
Where'd you go?
Yeah.
Hey, it's that ship.
No, we're Little Belt.
Boom! Yay!
Those Americans want their war by sinking Little Belt. They can have their war. If both parties agree, I, James Madison, officially declare war against Great Britain. Although Congress passed the war, the House and Senate were bitterly divided about the issue. Most Southern congressmen supported the war, while Federalists accused the advocates of using maritime rights as an excuse to promote their wartime agenda. The American troops were overly optimistic, unexperienced, and ill-prepared. This led to the defeat by Sir Isaac Brock on August 16, 1812.
On the other hand, the battle led by Commodore Oliver Hazard Perry at Lake Erie ended up being a great victory for the Americans, helping to turn around the tides and prove that they could defeat the British. On September 10, 1813, Captain Perry leads a fleet of 9 American ships against 6 British warships in Lake Erie. Perry's flagship, the Lawrence, was destroyed in the fighting, but then he returns with the Niagara to finish the job. Perry, with only 27 Americans killed and 96 wounded, against the 40 dead British soldiers and 94 wounded. With U.S. victory at Lake Erie, the British were forced to abandon Detroit, ensuring U.S. control over Lake Erie and the territorial Northwest. Following the Treaty of Greenville in 1795, which created a peaceful relationship between the Northwest Native Americans and the United States of America, the Treaty of Greenville in 1814 formed an alliance between the Northwest Indian tribes and the United States of America against Britain and its Native American allies.
The only obstacle in between the British and D.C. was the Battle of Bladensburg in Maryland. General Robert Ross, the British general, ended up defeating American militiamen. Shortly after, in the early afternoon, congressmen and officials fled the nation's capital. As the British Army entered Washington in the late afternoon, the British General Robert Ross and the officers dined at the White House that evening. Later that night, the British officers and the general torched the city, leaving a scarring mark on history forever. Before these attacks, however, Dolly, Madison's wife, ended up saving and preserving General Washington's mural that we still have today.
On September 12, 1814, British forces moved towards Baltimore in an attempt to destroy America's economy and morale in a two-pronged invasion consisting of a land force and a naval force. After the loss of their commander Robert Ross, though, and realizing that they were heavily outnumbered by the Americans, the British land force had to halt and wait for help from the naval force. On September 13th, British ships moved in within 2 miles of the fort and began their bombardment. They were out of range, though, and so many of their shells failed to reach the fort. They made several attempts to get closer, but each attempt was repelled by the Americans. The bombardment continued throughout the night, and with the coming of dawn, the British realized that their attempts had been futile. And atop Fort McHenry was a new massive flag erected in place to show the British that they had not won. This flag became known as the Star-Spangled Banner and inspired Francis Scott Key to write this song, which became our national anthem and was set to the tune of a British drinking song. Upon realization that the fort could not be taken, the British ordered a retreat and fell back.
The War of 1812 almost didn't even occur, because the British almost instantly repealed the Orders in Council, which curbed America's trade with Europe. The first proposed peace treaty between Britain and the United States was called the Russian Peace Plan. Tsar Alexander I of Russia would host a peace treaty in St. Petersburg. In March of 1813, when he offered this, Madison, almost immediately accepting of this plan, would follow through. However, the British, being very hot-headed and in no mood to talk, decided to not attend. Later on, both nations decided to have a meeting in Ghent, Belgium. America was at a big disadvantage for communication since it took weeks to get responses. America, however, did have a much more skilled panel than Great Britain had, which evened out the long time. During the debate, America had a much different goal than Great Britain had. The goals of the US were to restore everything that happened prior to the war, while Great Britain wanted everything they captured during the war. On Christmas Eve, 1814, both parties came to a conclusion. In the end, the US held its ground and got what they wanted, a restore to the past. Neither side gained anything from the war. The impressment wasn't even mentioned by the treaty either. The Indians were given their land back too, but without a map, this was meaningless.
Ironically now, though, the most famous battle of 1812 would not occur until after the signing of the treaty. This is due to poor communications of the time. At the same time, the British were launching an invasion towards New Orleans in an attempt to gain control of the Mississippi under the leadership of General Sir Edward, who had served in the Peninsular War. Upon realizing that an attack was imminent, Andrew Jackson declared martial law in New Orleans and ordered that every able-bodied man be brought arms in defense of the city. A force of around 4,500 men was brought together, including the help from pirates led by John Lafitte, against the 8,000 seasoned regulars the British had under their command. Jackson, who sought revenge against the British for his imprisonment during the Revolutionary War, was eager to fight them. And on December 23rd, he launched a nighttime attack on the British forces about 9 miles south of New Orleans. He ended up ordering his troops to fall back, though, to the Rodriguez Canal. There, Jackson ordered that the canal be made into a trench and that a rampart would be built. The British, thinking that Americans would surrender when they saw the giant force they had, moved quickly to attack. The British launched an attack of 3 forces. One sought to go and seize artillery owned by the Americans, another sought to flank the American forces, and another was a massive force that would go through the front. During the fighting, though, the ladder crew had failed to show up, which proved fatal to the British as they needed the ladders to scale the rampart. The British also quickly lost their leaders and were forced to order a retreat, upon many casualties. With the victory at New Orleans and few casualties being suffered by the Americans, Our national pride greatly rose at the thought of that they could repel a foreign threat.
Yay.